Guys, welcome to our special 6-episode series called Dwell on These Things. I'm Vera Schmitz.
And I'm her sister, Natalie Abbott. And guys, we are talking about the 6 verses in our new scripture memory Bible study with some of our friends, some really fun, amazing guests. And we are talking about our highest highs, like joy and peace and having a firm mind in the nearness of God himself.
But Natalie, we aren't just talking about the high highs. We are getting vulnerable, and we have a lot of compassion about our lowest lows, like things that plague our hearts, things that keep us up at night, the things that give us anxiety. These are really practical, good, honest, real conversations with real friends and experts in these matters. I'm so excited.
Yeah. And we are so glad that you're here with us. You don't have to do our Dwell on These Things Bible study to listen in, but I guarantee if you are listening to this, you're going to want to grab that Bible study at some point and do it with some friends. It is such a great thing to have these verses memorized for yourself. And we're so excited to have you here with us.
Thanks for joining us.
Hey, I'm Natalie Abbott.
And I'm Vera Schmitz. We are sisters who host the Dwell Differently podcast.
We help you memorize and meditate on one Bible verse every month. And all month long on our podcast, we talk about what that verse means, why it matters, and how we can apply that verse to our daily lives. Guys, welcome back to the Dwell Differently podcast. We are doing a special series called Dwell on These Things, and it is about our new Bible study with the same name, where we are talking through Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 9. And today we are talking about just a core verse. I'm going to let Vera tell you this verse.
Yes, it comes from Philippians 4:6. It says this: "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." And you've probably heard it before. It's kind of one of those cherry-picked verses that a lot of people use or share. And today we're going to dive way deep into it and get some awesome counseling, advice, wisdom from our friend Debra. Debra, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you guys for having me. I love our time together.
So Debra Fileta has been on our show before. You can go back. We'll link her past episodes if you want to listen for more from her, because honestly, like, you're one of my favorite all-time guests, Debra.
Oh,
I just feel like
compliment.
Anytime we have a counselor, there's just so much richness and depth that it feels so much more practical. Sometimes we have people who are more theologically minded and some people that are more practically minded. But I love having a counselor on every now and again to like really give us some insight into ourselves and how a verse like this can really be beneficial to us in the way that we live our lives. And I just want to put a little plug out there for Debra's new book. It's called Soul Care. And let me just read the subtitle, because it's like, I want all of this. Find life-giving rhythms, live restored, avoid burnout, and discover unspeakable joy. I mean, who doesn't want that? I want that. And yet I think this verse testifies to the fact that so often as Christians, even, we don't live like this is true. And that's why a verse like this is in the Bible, is to give us something that we can do when we find ourselves in that situation. But we were made for so much more. And can you speak a little bit to that, and maybe why you do so much of addressing sort of this stressed out, burned out, kind of lifestyle that we often, even as Christians, kind of practically live in? And how do we overcome that?
Yeah. Well, truth be told, Jesus is the one who said that he comes to give us life and life abundant. Another way of translating that verse says life in all of its fullness. And the part right before that says the enemy is the one who comes to steal and kill and destroy. And if Jesus comes to give us life in all of its fullness, like I think of peace, I think of joy, I think of energy, I think of motivation, then why is it that so many of us aren't living in that way? What is it that's sieving us, robbing us of our joy and our peace and our motivation? Why are we living burnt out when the Bible tells us to be a light that shines? We've got to be doing something wrong. And I think it's oftentimes we aren't taking inventory of what's going on inside of us. We're not taking inventory of how we're living. Are we living a life that's just pouring out without balancing it out by filling it up? How are we thinking? Are our thoughts aligned with God's truth, or are they aligned with our trauma? And so once we start having some insight into the fact that, wait a second, I can take responsibility for this, I can do it differently, then we start partnering with God on the journey of healing rather than just asking him for healing. So I think we have an important role to play. And this verse specifically shows us that we have a role in this. It's not just ask to be healed of your anxiety and you will be healed. There is an active role. We have to replace things. We have to do things differently. And so once we can take ownership of that, things begin to change.
Okay, well, I'm excited to hear about that. But before we get into that verse specifically, one of the things that you talk about in your book is how anxiety is on the rise in America, generally speaking, not just for Christians, but for everybody. And why do you think that is? Like, what is it about where our culture is right now that everybody is saying anxiety is on the rise? What specifically do you think are some of the reasons for that?
Well, I look at anxiety not necessarily as a sin. I see it as a signal. So our signals are going off loud and clear, maybe louder than ever before. It's like the check engine light. There is something wrong.
Right.
And you need to pay attention. And what's amazing about Jesus is that he was so good at listening to the signals and responding to the signals in a healthy way. And as you read through soul care is not just about, hey, here's some things that's going to help you feel better. Soul care digs into the 6 rhythms that Jesus himself practiced to care for his soul, to keep his body balanced. Jesus was fully God, yet fully man, and he knew that as a full human, he had human capacity, so he would honor that capacity by practicing these rhythms to care for his soul so that his body wouldn't get out of alignment and go into alarm mode. But our bodies go into alarm mode because we're not always paying attention. We're not always aware of our thoughts. We're not always filling up and taking care of ourselves and practicing these life-giving, healthy rhythms. And so anxiety is like a signal, alarm, something's going on, and you have to pay attention. The problem is, how do we respond to anxiety? Usually by just trying to shove it away, ignore it, numb it. Like, let me just scroll on social media. Let me just go and shop. Let me default to this addiction. Let me take the edge off with alcohol, rather than acknowledging the signal and then responding to the signal in a healthy way. So this verse ultimately is corroborating all of this. It's saying when the signal goes off, you have a choice to make. You can choose healthy behaviors to respond to the signal of anxiety, which would be by prayer and petition. I'm going to change my thoughts. I'm going to go to God. I'm going to take inventory of how I'm thinking and what I'm believing and who I'm bringing those things to. Or I'm going to respond to the signal in an unhealthy way by doing all of the things that numb and avoid and repress the anxiety, shove it down under there, assuming it's going to go away, but really it just builds and gets stronger and stronger and stronger until it bursts into our life in a really negative way. So I appreciate this verse so much because I really believe that our body sends us signals, and it's up to us to respond to those signals and keep ourselves healthy.
You know, that's so true. As somebody who has struggled with anxiety in different seasons, I think the number one lie I would believe during that season is you feel so anxious and your body is in this like alarm mode. Exactly. That's exactly what it feels like. Your body feels all the alarms are sounding. And the lie I would tell myself was, I don't have time to go do the work I need to do. Like it takes time to do what you're talking about, like really do the work. And so I would believe this lie, like I don't have space in my schedule to, make my appointment with my counselor. And it got bad enough where it was finally like, okay, I have to do something different,
right.
or I'm going to completely fry out and not be available for the people I love most. And I think a lot of folks are in that place where it's a scarcity. I don't have the time. I don't have the resources to care for myself.
Right. And that's why we have to start seeing soul care as a necessity. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. If I don't honor my capacity and stay filled, I will get depleted and burnt out and empty and anxious. And here my body is trying to get my attention. And I'm still pushing through because I'm like, whoa, I must be weak because I'm having all these symptoms. You're not weak. You're just ignoring your body's built-in alarm systems. And I say built-in because I believe that God created us with these alarm systems to help us keep balanced and healthy and to recognize our deep need for Him. I mean, when you look at the life of Jesus and how He practiced these things, how often He set boundaries and got away and practiced rhythms of rest and connection with life-giving relationships, He didn't allow Himself to get to empty because He knew He had a responsibility. He had to keep pouring out. We have a calling. And in order for us to pour out in the way that God asks us to, we've got to stay filled. It's a necessity. And I don't know about you guys, but I believe there's a humility there of saying, Lord, I need you to fill me up. I need to care for myself. Because to me, the opposite of that is a pride in thinking, I can do this. I'm strong enough. I can get through this. But really, we're not honoring our capacity. And then we burn out and we get to really unhealthy places. So I think it takes a level of humility to be able to say, I am aware that I have a limited capacity and I'm going to honor that.
Okay. Can I just say, Debra, you're totally blowing my mind right now because I feel like we can say that we have a limited capacity and be like, yeah, that's true. That's true. But for you to talk about the limited capacity that Jesus took on in becoming human and looking at His perfect living out within the bounds of that capacity as a means and a model for us to follow is like, why did I ever, how did I not think of that? That is so helpful because I think it helps us see that our limits are not sin. It's not that, there's something wrong with me. It's that I'm a creature. I was created this way. And the limitations that I have are actually the boundaries that are set for me. And if I walk rightly in them, there is life for me in that.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And seeing it, I'm a licensed counselor. So seeing all of this through the lens of psychology and counseling is second nature. But seeing it through the life of Christ was mind-blowing for me personally. I wrote this book in 16 days, 16 and a half. But
Your
that
pen
just,
was
I
on
think you
fire.
have a higher capacity than the rest of us.
I'm telling you guys, that has never happened before.
Wow.
I sat down and I had been marinating on it and I'd been, sitting in the Gospels and just like looking at the life of Christ through the lens of soul care and how balanced He was, And so when I sat down to write, it just felt like God's gift to me. Like, this is for you first, and then it's going to flow out of you into the lives of so many people. But let me just give you an example of a little tiny thing that blew my mind. One of the rhythms is savor, and it's about celebration, being present, thanksgiving, and enjoying life. Just living in the moment versus worrying about the future, be anxious for nothing. How much time do we get distracted worrying about the future or regrets from the past? So our mind has a hard time staying present. And then we've got these devices in our pocket that distract us, right? So there was a verse in Matthew 13, verse 1. I've never seen it before, and I guarantee you haven't either. It says, Jesus left the house. He was in a house. He had just done ministry. Jesus left the house and went and sat by the lake, period. My mind was blown. I'm like, just to see him in that form, just sitting by the lake. Why? Shouldn't he have been doing something? Like there's somebody to heal, there's something to do. I just imagine, I love the ocean, and I can just imagine him sitting by the lake and just breathing in the air and just sitting and having a moment with the Lord and getting away from the noise and the people, you know, like with the drain of people, and just being by himself for a minute. Now, right after that, people noticed him and a crowd started gathering around him. And of course, that's when he goes into the parable of the sower, where he talks about the distractions and worries of life. But just to see him practicing what he preached right before then and just having a moment was so cool. And just little bits and pieces all over the Gospels that just reaffirmed how he was so intentional. He had a slow pace. He wasn't frazzled. You know, like when I think of Jesus and I see him through the Gospels, it wasn't this frazzled, worried life, even though he knew all that was to come. He was so intentional about keeping himself balanced and filled and keeping his mind in healthy places and connecting with God, withdrawing with the Lord. It's not like the Garden of Gethsemane. He had frequented that garden many times to be with the Lord, to get filled. And it was just such a beautiful, I just fell more in love with him as I read the Gospels, and specifically through this lens.
Hey guys, I hope that you are loving this conversation just as much as we loved having it. These guests are amazing. Their words are powerful, but the most powerful part about this conversation is God's word.
Amen, Vera. Yeah, if you are looking to get those words in your heart and mind, gosh, we would love to encourage you to go ahead and get that Bible study, grab some friends, do it with friends, and have these conversations yourself. Get those words in your heart and mind. We give you all the tools to do it in the Bible study. And if you're interested, you can check out our links in our show notes. That'll be in there for you. And then also you can just go to dwelldifferently.com. You'll find it on our website. We're so glad you're here with us.
I love that because I so often, I'm predisposed towards efficiency and production.
I'm with you, girl.
So it's like yesterday, my husband took my 2 older sons to go have a little adventure, and it was just me at the house with my baby asleep, napping. And I was
Let me guess, you watched a movie.
Yeah, never. No, I am prepping lunches for the week. I am prepping breakfast for the week, doing all the things. And this is how psycho my brain is. It's like I wasn't listening to anything, and I felt unproductive while I was producing. I'm like, I should be listening to a parenting podcast. I should be listening to a sermon. I should be should. And it's like I needed to give myself permission to actually just be in the quiet while I was prepping food.
Yeah.
It's still producing. Like,
Right.
I think our culture, it's like the things that hit me on Instagram that I'm targeted for are like, it's always about efficiency in producing. How can I get more things done in the day? And it's like,
Right.
no, he leads me beside quiet waters, actually.
Right. Right.
That's what he's doing there. He's going to sit by the quiet water. And yet I'm like, well, how can I build a pump there so I can get fresh water up the hill so then I don't have to go down to the lake, you know?
Right. And that's not how Jesus lived. 3 years of ministry, right? He started at 30. He knew he was going to be crucified at 33. Yet he paced himself. He wasn't like, we got to get this done. Hustle. I can only sleep 2 hours tonight. We've got up at the crack of dawn. We got so much work to do. He didn't live his life like that. He had so much margin. He was so intentional. He was so present with the people around him. He took naps when he needed to.
In the storm. He took naps.
Peace out. I'm going to go sleep. I don't know about you guys, but I just poured out and I need to recharge. You know? And he didn't feel guilt because he was so in tune with God's calling on his life. He wasn't motivated by people pleasing or the obligation of man. So confident in his calling. He was just beautiful. I just loved learning from his life and having the humility to realize, man, if Jesus himself lived like this, who am I to think my calling is greater. You know, like I have more to do and I need to do it differently. It was just really eye-opening, and it kind of shows you partly why we have so much anxiety. Because we're living this rat race that's not what we were intended to live. We're carrying mental burdens we were never intended to carry. So it all kind of works together, but it just challenges you to realize that the signals our body is sending us are important, and they remind us we need to pay attention and then do things differently.
Yeah, I think so. The verse specifically that we're talking about, because I think there are a lot of things, like you said, there are these 6 practices that Jesus had. This verse specifically is talking about the practice of prayer. It's talking about when I feel this way, here's a prescription for what I can do with those feelings, which is to take them and to give them with God. And I just think, like, how would you say, even from your own life, Debra, how is prayer the right prescription for anxiety? How does that work? How does it work itself out in who we are as humans, that when we're struggling with something, we're anxious about something, we're worrying about the future or situation or whatever, that in all of these situations, like our verse says, that if we give these things to God, there's a transaction that happens, I think, on the soul level. Can you explain that to us a little bit?
Well, one of the practices that Jesus practiced to care for his soul is protect. He protected himself, his mind, his calling. And to me, protection means we set boundaries around our life. We learn when to say no and not yet. And Jesus specifically protected his time with the Father. That was off limits. There was nothing that was going to intrude on that time with the Father. He got away frequently to pray, to be alone with God. And in my mind, what he's doing is he's aligning his thoughts to truth rather than to experience. He's aligning his thoughts to truth rather than trauma. The trauma that he was experiencing, the betrayal, the abandonment, what was to come, the humiliation of the crowds and the judgment of people, that's trauma that he was experiencing in small ways and big ways on a daily basis. And his mind could have aligned to that trauma if he was like us, but he was so intentional of getting away to align his mind with truth. He had to sit under that truth, because if we're not actively participating in that alignment, slowly we drift into trauma. And I think that is so profound and such a model for us. Prayer isn't just us giving our requests to God only. It's also us receiving perspective, receiving strength, receiving from him. So that's why it's like when you feel anxious and your body is sending you this signal, don't just sit in that. Respond. Do something about it. Go to prayer. Ask God to help you realign your mindset, help you to see things from his perspective, give him the burdens. Like, go into this quiet, special place and start to adjust and recalibrate and do things differently. And when you leave that place, you will be filled with the peace of God that transcends all understanding. It will guard your heart. It will guard your mind. But there's an exchange that has to happen. And as a counselor, I talk to people all the time about the number one thing they can do is take inventory of their thoughts. And I think the best place that we can do that is in the throne room of grace in front of Jesus, the author of truth. Like, here's what I got going on. Here's my trauma. Here's my stress from the day. Here's my perspective. Here's my catastrophizing, my black and white thinking, my exaggerating. Lord, help me align this to your truth. You know?
I have a question. So in our verse, it says, present your requests to God with thanksgiving. And so when you think about praying and it's asking us to also be thankful, how do that gratitude aspect really, how is that a part of how we approach God? And how does that change us that exchange you're talking about of our anxiety for his peace.
One of the coolest parts of soul care, my favorite rhythm for me personally, was the rhythm of savor. And I talked about that a minute ago, Jesus just savoring life. But part of savor is also gratitude and thanksgiving and celebration. And there was a offering in the Old Testament called the Thanksgiving offering, also known as the fellowship offering. And it was our way of sacrificing something as a thanksgiving to God, as gratitude to God. It was the only sacrifice that would also be shared with the offerer. So it was a portion of it was given back to me to enjoy. And to me, that is the epitome of gratitude. Gratitude is for me as well. It changes me. It's a gift. Sure, I'm giving gratitude to God. I think I'm giving him a gift. And he's like, yeah, this is going to do a lot more for you than it's going to do for me. Because you need to remember, you need to realign. You need to focus on what you have and who I am versus all the things you're worried about. So gratitude is for the giver. And we know in psychology and neuroscience, gratitude literally rewires you, because as you're thinking thoughts of gratitude and thanksgiving, it starts to change the proteins, the chemicals in your body. You decrease your cortisol and you increase your serotonin and dopamine just by releasing things that you're grateful for, because your mind is fixated on those things and then your body starts to feel differently. So there's a neuroscience chemical component to gratitude that it's doing something for me. It's rewiring my mind and it's giving me a serotonin and dopamine boost. It's not just, Lord, I thank you, you're amazing, because he needs it. He's like, you need this more than I do. And so that's the beautiful, like that verse to me is this recipe. Like, come realign your thoughts. Come realign your nervous system by being grateful, by giving me your requests, by thinking healthy, by doing this differently. And let me help you have peace. Let me help you with this. And it's like, again, even this verse is not a luxury. It's not one of those verses we put up on our kitchen wall and we're like, oh, how sweet, and it's such beautiful wall art. This is life or death.
Yeah.
This
Amen.
is like a necessity for us to function each day and to live full and to be healthy and to exchange the burden of anxiety for peace. Like, I'm just so grateful that we serve a God who is so aware of our weakness and our needs and is like, don't worry, I'm with you. I've got this.
Debra, what would you say to somebody who's hearing all of this, who is like, yeah, but my struggle is so deep and it is so real to me and it is really hard. And, you know, maybe I've been burned before and I just don't know if I'm ready to be vulnerable. I'm ready to do that hard work, like you were saying, Vera, where it just feels like it's almost too much to even go there. What would you say to somebody who's like, this all sounds good and right, and it does seem like a poster I could hang in my kitchen, but like how do you get from point A to point B if you're in that really low spot? Like, what would you advise as like the first step?
Well, let me just start by saying that the work of healing is hard, for sure. But living unhealed is a lot harder. A lot harder. It's like, I'm going to do some work up front so that I don't have to carry this burden for life. I don't know about you guys, but I know the burden of anxiety. And it is one of the hardest things I've ever had to carry. It is not fun. It completely puts a damper on your whole day, on your whole life. It is a heavy burden to carry. And I can attest that the work of healing is hard, but it's not harder than carrying the burden of anxiety all through life. So it is work that is difficult, but alleviates the hardship later. And you're not doing the work of healing alone, you know? God is with you in that process of healing. Now, let's back up because I think there's levels of anxiety. And as a licensed counselor, I'm going to have to go here. There is mild anxiety, there is moderate anxiety, and there is severe anxiety. Severe anxiety is when it's affecting your life and paralyzing you. You're not able to go places. You're having panic attacks. You are feeling limited, and it's literally affecting your daily routine. I don't want to go out anymore. I don't want to hang out with friends anymore. I'm scared to go shopping. I'm having panic attacks. I can't get out of bed. When you get to that level where your cortisol levels are so off that it's actually having a physical impact, you're not sleeping at night, you're not eating well, then we need to address the physical components through counseling and potentially medication to bring your body back to baseline. So that's something to discuss with your counselor and your doctor. With moderate to severe anxiety, that's kind of where my mind goes of we need to really get to the roots, whether it's trauma history coming up, those alarms, your body's hypervigilant because you have so much trauma that it's been hypervigilant your whole life and now it doesn't know how to shut down, right? So that's where counseling and working with a physician can be very helpful. When we're talking about mild to moderate anxiety, most of the time through practicing healthy rhythms, such as the ones found in soul care, you can start to do things differently and start to recalibrate your body on your own. So I do think there's a difference in anxiety level, and then depending on the level would help us figure out what the next step might look like.
That's super helpful. I appreciate you kind of bringing that to the basics for us. And for anybody that's listening, I would encourage you, if you're in that moderate to severe category, tell somebody, talk to somebody, seek, pastoral care, see a counselor, tell your best friend.
That's what we're here for. That is literally my job, is to help people who are struggling with this, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe, to just kind of help you do an assessment. That's what counselors are for. And when you find a counselor who is also walking with the Lord, rooted in scripture, rooted in God's truth, you're not only helping your emotional and mental health, but your spiritual health. And that all kind of works together.
Debra has an amazing ministry online. So we'll link her ministry where you can find amazing counselors that you can meet with virtually. So if you're in that space and you're like, I can't even leave my house, how am I going to find a counselor, a Christian counselor? And I see a counselor myself, and I remember like really wanting to have had somebody vet this person for me. It's like, I don't want to just go to anybody. So this is a great place for anybody who's like, I cannot do the work of trying to find the right person. This is just an amazing resource.
Yeah. Well, guys, I want to keep talking so much because I feel like there's so much further that we could go with this and more that we could delve into. I've got like 5 or 6 other questions here that we never got to, but that's okay. Debra, thank you so much for joining us and for your wisdom. And for those of you who are listening, we're going to have links to her new book and to her website and to her counseling resources. And we would just encourage you. We all go through seasons where we deal with anxiety in big and small ways, and to take advantage of those resources. And if you're not in a place where you're struggling with anxiety, maybe now's the time to read a book like Soul Care that you can start establishing these patterns right now in order to help yourself for when the hard thing does come, because we know in this fallen world, it's always going to be there. So we need these kinds of patterns that we've established that God has put for us to help us have lives that are thriving. So thank you so much, Debra, for joining us today.
It is always a privilege to be with you. I love this ministry and the fact that God's word is the forefront of our heart and mind. So thank you for pointing us back to God's truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening to today's show. But before you go, I just want to give you a great tip. I have started getting my news through a Christian news source called The Pour Over. You can either listen to their short daily podcast or you can get their news sent to your inbox. I get both, and depending on the day, I either listen or I read the news. But here's the really great thing. It helps keep me up to date on current events, but it does so in a way that isn't shock news or biased. It's just the facts interspersed with relevant biblical truth to help keep things in the right perspective, which is really important. It's really great. It's free. And if you're interested in giving it a try, there's a link in the show notes.